Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Session. So I'm going to be talking to you all about access and inclusion in the plural community. So talking about how to make a safe space, inclusive space for minorities, and how to be a good ally. So just so you know, since we're talking to you all live, you can actually send any questions that you want. Um, so we're going to get a notice that tells us what questions you might be asking us. I know there is a little bit of a delay, so just be aware of that, but we're totally open to answering any questions while we're going through this because I think that makes it a little bit more of an interactive experience. So just wanted to let you all know. All right. So one of the important things when you're talking about being inclusive for other people and in talking about diversity and minority statuses, et cetera, is actually socially locating yourselves or yourself. So what does that actually mean? It means that you have to talk about who you are, who you all are, what your background is, your culture, values, et cetera. So you need, and we'll mention this a lot through this talk, but basically what you need to be doing is examining you or you all as a system, figuring out where you're coming from, because that will help you understand why you're having the responses you're having to other people. If you don't socially locate yourself, it's really difficult. Another reason to do this is because it's helpful to socially locate yourself if you're presenting, for example, which we'll do this in a minute too, because people who are listening to you or watching or whatever, they will understand where you're coming from. So if you're able to say, here's my background and my experiences, people might think, oh, that helps me understand why they feel this way about X or why they're talking in this way. And so you need to figure out is what are the most salient identities to you or you all. So here are just a few of ours. We have plenty. So we're plural. We're also Puerto Rican, and we're a psychologist. The reason that we put high level of education is because that's one of the things that you need to think about too, is not just the things that define you all, but also where do you have more privilege. So in one of the places that we have more privilege is that we were able to get a higher level of education. So we listed genderqueer as a system because we present as genderqueer more often than not. It doesn't mean that everyone in our system is. It's just easier that way. So basically, that's just one of the identities we have. Our sexuality also queer. I don't know, question mark. It's complicated. We're an immigrant. We're an English second language speaker, which is also important because sometimes we might, even though I know that we speak fluently and I don't think we have much of an accent, there are times where we actually don't understand what somebody is saying, and this is partly why. So from low SES, but now we've moved to low to middle SES. We love video games, and look, for us, this is very important. You can probably see the Pokemon calendar right there. And the other ones, there's Journey over there too. And that's a really important part of who we are. So we just talk about that. Very geeky in a lot of different ways, and artistic. We like drawing comics and things like that. So this is just an example that we're trying to give you. It's also a way for you to know us a little bit better and to know where we're coming from when we're talking. But we also wanted to give you an example of how you can socially locate yourself, because as you can see, we basically just pick the ones that are most important to us. There isn't really like specific things you need to pick or identities that you have to talk about. It's whatever seems important to you and comfortable sharing with other people. So for systems specifically, it is true that a lot of you will have completely different identities because you're different people, but you might have some things in common. So for example, maybe you all grew up in a certain country, right? So you have that in common. Maybe you've all experienced being of the same SES, and SES is social economic status. So basically, just in case somebody doesn't know, it's not only how much money you're making, but also your status in the world. It's kind of like a brief way of explaining that. So you may have actually shared some experiences as well. Maybe not all of them, but it is possible that you have some that are shared. Maybe you consider your family members to be the same for all of you. It really depends on what you define for yourselves. So the things that you should be thinking about is, okay, what are the identities that are most important to us as a system? Because that's where you all are going to be coming from. For a singlet, it's a lot easier because there's only one of you, so you can hopefully figure this out quicker. And then another thing to think about also is, what are the different identities you as an individual in a system or not have that are important. So like we were saying before, the more that you can kind of like look at yourself and your identities, the easier it's going to be for you to understand people who are different from you. And it's important that if you notice like, oh, the reason that I'm getting upset at someone is because they have a value that's very different from mine, that is easier than if you just know, oh, I'm getting really mad at this person, but I don't actually know why. Hopefully through this process, you'll be more open to other people's identities. And by looking at what your experiences are, you basically move away from this idea that you're normal. And I don't mean that in a negative way. What we mean by that is often what people think is my experience of the world is normal, as in I'm going to rate everything against my experience of the world. And if somebody has a different experience from me, then they are not normal or they are different. And that sometimes might lead to someone thinking, oh, they're wrong, or that that experience can't be possible because I have an experience. So this is more what we're talking about, in that by socially locating yourself, you can kind of move away from that idea and realize, oh, all of us have experiences that are normal. My experience of life isn't the same as everyone else. And maybe I shouldn't be measuring everyone by that. I did see that a question came in, but now I cannot find it. So if you send it again, maybe I'll see it. Anyway, okay, so I'm going to go to the next one, but hopefully I'll see the question come back in a second. So, oh, hold on. Okay. Okay. For SES, it does seem like I already kind of answered that. But yes, one of the ways to look at it, so it's social economic status. One of the ways to look at it is low, middle class, high, but it's more complicated than that. So for example, let's say that the Kardashians, it's just an example that y'all can probably follow. Let's say that they go bankrupt, okay? Even though technically they have no money, they still have a higher SES than most people because they have clout, which means like people respect them in a certain way. Maybe not, but I'm just saying like the people they interact with. They know other people who are important. So the likelihood of them succeeding is actually higher than somebody who started out as poor. It's the best I can do to explain that. So how did I or we achieve our level of functioning that's needed to do our job? I feel like that is a very long question. The briefest way to put it would be that we worked on a lot of communication with each other a long time ago. And we did have a difficult time in our undergrad, partly because of life circumstances and partly because we weren't able to talk to each other in a way that actually made sense. So at one point, someone in the system, not the person who's talking now, somebody else, basically who has a lot of power, was like, we need to have a meeting about this. We can't keep having problems like we were having at that moment. We all met, literally everybody, which is a lot of people, and decided like to start working towards getting along better as a system. And at that point, we worked on increasing our communication, helping each other. We didn't have access to good mental health, so we kind of had to do a lot of this on our own. And I mean, it was a long process, but basically it was us turning from a group that we were still a family, but we definitely were more dysfunctional, let's say, to a family that really loves and cares for each other. Well, we did before too, but that actually communicates. I feel like that's the shortest way I can answer the question that you all just asked, because it's actually more complicated than that. Oh, and another thing that would be important would be being able to have co-consciousness for obvious reasons. You need to all be aware of what's going on. and to be able to switch whenever you need to. So those are two things that we can do, and we've been able to do that for a long time now. And another question I'm seeing is advice for newly discovered systems when pondering a career path. I don't know. I would say the two biggest things to think about would be one, your level of functioning, as the other person asked, or maybe it's the same one. But it would also be, what is a career that most of you can agree with, at least the people who are going to be out all the time. So for us, that took a while. We actually started in a different career, sort of, in our undergrad, and then we switched to psychology. But most of us agreed that that's what we wanted to do. And funny enough, I would say almost all of us have agreed that that's what we are happy was our career. There's a few people who would have liked to do something else, but honestly, they're not out almost at all. And so unfortunately, they kind of like lost the boat, so to say. So we basically, that's how we figured that out. And we actually have always done very well in school, even when things were really bad. So we knew that we could probably go to school for a very long time. And then for system mates, I don't know how to answer that question. Someone was asking how many system mates. Let's just say it's around 20 of the people who are out often and interact IRL, I guess, so to speak. But there's a lot more than that. So it would be hard for us to count. But let's just say 20-ish, just for the sake of conversation. All right, I'm going to go back to this and then I'll answer some more questions when I see some more come in. Okay, so I know I talked about this already. We did want to mention this very briefly of what privilege and oppression is. It does seem like at this point, most people know what these two terms are. However, sometimes people get really caught up in things like in privilege, sometimes people use it as an insult or to call people out in a way. And long story short, all privilege means is that it's an unearned advantage that you have. And this could be something as simple as like, oh, my skin is a lighter tone, so I have an easier time getting through the world than someone who has darker skin. Right. So it just means something like that. Like things that you did nothing to get them. It's just like because of whatever trait it is, you will have an easier time than somebody else in some ways. And oppression is when somebody uses their power or authority in a way that hurts or somebody else. And it also plays out in social groups. So for example, one group has more power than they're oppressing another group who has less power. So what are some of the types of privilege that exist? Here is a non-exhaustive list of what those are. So some examples are age, class, gender identity, SES race, etc. There's a lot of different types of privilege that exist in the world. Some of the ones that people tend to not know as well on this list are like size. So that just means that if you're thinner, you have an easier time getting around in the world than someone who's bigger. It's another one that people kind of get stuck on. So the social like mobility, that's kind of what we talked about, was our example earlier, that if you are able to move upward in the world easier than somebody else, that in itself is a privilege. And then parent status is kind of complicated. Basically, it depends on what community you're in, what country you live in, a lot of factors. The long and the short of it is, for some people, being a parent will give you more privilege, and for others, it will not. But it depends on like age, community, etc. An easy example to understand is that when somebody is too young and they become a parent, often they're ostracized and they're not given privileges. They're instead treated poorly because they've become a parent. That also happens if you're too old. So there's a specific period where you're supposed to be a parent. Not really, but this is what society kind of thinks. And then let's say that you're at the age that you're expected to have kids, and in your community that is common, then you become more respected once you have children. That's what that one's about. Location of residence means where you live, so what country you live in, but also what area you live in, things like that. So there's many different types of privilege is what we're trying to say. And it's important to start looking at, okay, within ourselves, what are some types of privilege that we have? Here's the types of oppression. They match on relatively to the slide before. A few ones that are different would be like homonegativity and heteronormativity. I know some people don't know the difference between those two. Homonegativity would be closer to homophobia, which is what the common word people use. But the reason why homophobia isn't the best word to use is because it means like you're afraid of anyone who's not straight. Homonegativity specifically means you think poorly of everybody who's not straight. Like you have a negative impression of them, which is a little bit closer usually to what people are trying to say. Heteronormativity just means that you assume everybody is straight, and so you treat people differently based on that. The same could be, say, for like cisnormativity. That's the same thing, but for gender. And then for colonialism, that one affects us more because we're literally from a colony, and it's very complicated how that affects you. But basically, it's that the country that colonized your country will have a specific influence on your culture, your people, laws, all of that. Xenophobia is when somebody hates someone for another country. I'm hoping that the rest of them are pretty well understood, but if not, you can always just send a question, and we're happy to answer that for you. So, what are some difficulties for inclusion within our community specifically, right? There are a lot of different like etiologies of being plural, and all that means is like a cause or an origin of why a system might be plural. So here are just a few examples. Hopefully you are familiar with these. And so part of the issue is that because systems can have a wide range of etiologies, there can be separation in these communities, which I think you all are aware of and has probably experienced. And so you could have someone who is in one group saying that the other group shouldn't be included. And so that makes it really difficult. So there's a lot of infighting because of this. A lot of people, the most common thing is like, oh, anyone who's in my group is real, all the rest of you are fake. And it happens, I feel like, on all sides. This other idea that like, oh, you're a different type of system, so you're wrong. You can't be a system because I'm not like that, so you can't be like that either. Or that you need to conform to like someone's values. So these are some of the difficulties that come up. It's unfortunate that there's this much infighting in the community. We really hope that this conference actually helps to lower that somewhat, and that people are able to be open to others' experiences. And that's why we started with you looking at what identities are important to you. If the origin or cause, or however you want to look at it, of you all being plural is really important to you, then that's an important identity and you need to look at that. Not in a negative way, just in seeing, okay, if this is really important to me, what does that mean? What does that mean when I meet people who are different than us? So like we just said, so examining your own experiences more to see if that can help you understand everyone else. Try to see the other people's point of view and understand that you don't have to agree with each other, right? It's more of being respectful in your communication of each other and trying to be inclusive rather than exclusive. So one of the things that comes up for us a lot when thinking about inclusion for the community is the fact that we all have difficulties that are very common. We all face similar types of stigma because singlets can't tell the difference. You know what I'm trying to say? Like a lot of singlets are not going to be like, oh, this is this type of system, this is that type of system. Not really. They're just going to see us all as if they have a stereotype of the stereotype that they have of someone being plural or DID or whichever they're thinking of. So thinking of, okay, how can we support each other basically and have more positive experiences as a community instead of adding to all the negative experiences and oppression that we're all experiencing already. So this is the point of this. And you also need to think about what types of privilege do you and your system have that other people don't, and try to help those who are more marginalized. We went through a lot of different types of privilege and oppression. It is important to think about that when you're talking to people, you know. Like one good example I was thinking of from the panel before, that we were talking, everyone was talking about coming out or not and what that means. Some people are able to come out and some people are not. And you need to understand that there's a privilege in even considering to be able to come out. And if someone isn't able, just like you would with any other community, you should not be trying to force them to come out, obviously, right? It's more like, okay, how can you be safe? How can you take care of yourself? And there's other types of privilege as well. So even just if you all are living in the US, I mean, there's more access here to information about being plural, or even talking to therapists who even know what it is than people in other countries have. So this is what we're talking about when it comes to looking at the types of privilege you have, and you and you as a system, and understanding that when you're talking to other people. So here are some of the examples that we have of our own privilege, because it's always better to talk about yourself than to talk about other communities. You know what I mean? Like, instead of being like, well, you have this privilege and you have this, that's not really useful a lot of the times. So instead, we're going to talk about the privileges that we have. So we've known that we were a system, I don't know, forever, always. So that in itself is a privilege, because even though, yes, there was some confusion about what to call where we were, what we were. So it's not like we haven't had those periods in our life. We didn't like discover we were a system much later in life. Like, we've known about this really always. And we were able to understand what we were pretty early on, maybe middle school. I mean, there's a lot of denial in that. Okay, I'm not saying there wasn't, but even the fact that we understood that early on is a privilege in itself. We have really good communication with each other. We don't lose time. We have a profession and we have a lot of stability in our lives because of that. So those are all privileges that we have. Because of that, we're in a space usually to be more understanding of other people and have sympathy. I say usually because we all run out of spoons, okay? So if we run out, we also need a break. But I'm just saying that when we were doing much worse financially, because we were really low SES up until very recently, you don't have as much space to be helping other people or supporting the community or even yourself, because you're thinking about surviving. And that's really your number one priority. When you start to have a little bit of space from that, then you have the ability to do other things. So now we're able to focus on our practice, and what that means is our private practice and teaching and all of that. We also, I think we mentioned this in one of the other panels, but we basically try to step into conversations online. You may not know it's us, but we have done this quite a few times, and try to diffuse the situation if we can, when we have the energy to do this. So those are some of the things that we do online, but in person, we do a lot more than that. So here are some questions for y'all to consider for yourself or yourselves. How would you all be able to help others in a similar way and be an ally? So let's say that you have the spoons for it, you have the energy. What are some things that you can do? And it doesn't have to be huge. You know, I think that even in being able to step in to a situation, maybe say to someone, hey, I don't like that you're talking to someone like that, or even just not participating and bringing someone down. Like, there are a lot of things that you can actually do. And another thing to think of is, how do you wish other people would help you? So what are some places where you're kind of like, we're struggling with this and we wish that we had help, but we don't. And we wish that other people would step in this way. So I don't know if anyone answers in the chat, please let me know. But these are some questions that we would like you to think about. So on both sides, how can I help the community and other people? And this is for people who are plural or singlet, it doesn't matter. And how do I want other people to help me? So as someone who's plural, what are some ways that I feel like I could be helped or more in the community, or feel more comfortable in this community? So another thing that's important to consider with inclusion and privilege and oppression and all of this is your minority statuses and those of others. So intersectionality, if you don't know what that is, it's just the intersection of the different identities that you have. And I'm not using identity as a way to talk about people in a system. I'm talking about identities like your race, your class, the stuff we've been talking about through this. So it's more, okay, what are all the identities that we have? How do those intersect with each other and make us into the people that we are? So depending on how those interact with each other, that does affect your privilege or marginalization. So one example would be, I think I have it later, but I'm going to say it now anyway. One example would be that, let's say that you're in the United States and you go to another country and you don't speak the language and nobody there speaks English. Your privilege has already diminished instantly, because that means that you cannot communicate with anyone, you can't get the services that you need, and you will be more vulnerable. So that is an easy way to think of how your privilege can change just by location. There's more nuanced ways to think of that, but I think that one's pretty easy. So another reason that you have to explore your own identity, as we said before, is to even see like, okay, how are some ways that our identities are intersecting with each other to make us who we are? So this is one example of how you can think about your intersecting identities. We use this a lot with our classes. So we saw we put it here. It's actually called the Kleinman Matrix. It's by another psychologist. It's from 2010. This one, it doesn't have anything related to being plural. Sorry about that. I do think that it'd be nice to have one that did. We always keep wanting to make our own, but we just haven't had the time to make one. Still, it's helpful to look at this one, even though it's not all inclusive, but it definitely has some good points. So hopefully y'all can read this on the screen. I have no idea, but if you can, so all these lines that are coming out of this middle, they're all different identities that somebody can have. And of course, there's more than this. But some examples would be like, okay, years of education, or how many years of education did the people who raised me have, for example? What's our household income now? What was our income as a child? So there's a lot of different questions. And the way it works is that the more privileged you are, the closer to the middle of the circle your point is, basically. And the less privileged, the more your line kind of spikes out. So we actually didn't add ours, which I think we kind of probably should have, so you could have seen a filled out one. But when they're done, they look like this kind of like spiky, almost like an urchin, I think is the right word, thing. And then you can see at a glance like where somebody has privilege and marginalization, because again, so the longer and bigger the spike, the more marginalized you are, and the smaller, the more privileged you are. So this is one way that we have people explore their identities, because there's an article that comes with this and some instructions that you fill out to kind of figure out what point you're at. It has people really think about like, okay, not only who am I now, but also what are the things that we experienced when we were younger. So hence like income, years of education of the people who cared for us. What's another good one that's on here? So like immigration status is another one. Languages spoken. Like, do you speak the language? Like, is your first language the main language of the country you live in, for example? Or cognitive ability or learning style, that's in here too. So there's a lot of them. And you can see like, okay, how did the people who raised me, how did their privilege and marginalization affect me? Because it does. And then how do my own identities right now affect that as well? So everyone has areas of privilege and marginalization. That can sometimes be hard for people to think of, because sometimes I think that we all do this. We kind of only focus on the areas that were marginalized because those are the ones that we think of the most often. But really, everyone has at least some area of privilege and marginalization. It might not be very much. That's the difference, right? Some people might have very little privilege, and others might have a lot. But everyone has both of these things happening at the same time. So if you have more overall privilege than others, it is important to think of how can I or we help the community, right? If we have more privilege than other people, what are ways that we can step in? And try to think of how you can uplift each other rather than tear each other down. And also that includes when you're talking to someone, if you have more privilege, not focusing on one area of marginalization that you have and kind of being like, oh, but I understand because whatever. You should be thinking also about like, okay, but what are some of the areas of privilege that I have in which that I can help other people? I did see a question come in, so I'll answer it in a moment. And then I think I already mentioned, yeah, so we already mentioned this, like privilege and marginalization can change based on the location. This is kind of the example we thought of before. Okay. Is there a word for those who oppress those who are plural or multiple? I do not know of one. We should probably make one, really, right? I don't know what that would be. Somebody who kind of sucks. I don't know. that's not the official term. I really don't know of any that would be specific, but now it's kind of bugging me because I feel like we should have one. What would that plural oppressive? I would like that if saying peas in English wasn't so hard for us. That's not bad though. I feel like that's too long. Plural negativity, maybe that could work. I don't know, but now we're going to think about this for a while because we should have a word. There's definitely a type of discrimination towards people who are plural. Usually we just put it up in mental health stigma, but I actually think, funny enough, I think that if there was a word for this type of oppression, it would actually help us because it would help to bring more awareness, right? So in the same way that homonegativity or cisgender negativity or, well, trans negativity actually, and all those things come up, it's a way for people to understand, oh, this is something that is a problem that we should be addressing. Not everyone, but I think the people who are more willing to take that stance and help would see it that way. So I don't know of one, but now I'm really going to think about it. I still like plural negativity. Plural oppressive makes sense, but I don't know. As a non-English speaker, that's the only hesitation I have. Okay. So this is more, and look, this is not based on, well, it's sort of based on research, but it's mostly based on our own experiences and looking at the media. So please take this with a grain of salt, okay? We were trying to think, what are the populations that are most represented in the plural community? And not like when you go to a Discord chat, that, I mean, sort of, we were more thinking of in books, literature, media, psychologists talking to each other, or any therapist talking to each other, like that type of thing, case studies. And this is what we came up with. So usually it's a European American or Caucasian or someone who's white in the United States, usually younger. So often the examples that we see are in the teens and 20s. We were also thinking about the fact that even in the community, over and over again on like Discord and other chats, we always see people in their teens and 20s. And we're over here like, what happened to all the people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s? Because they existed at some point. So where are they? Often it's somebody who's assigned female at birth. Often it's a cisgender female in the media. But I thought that was a better way of putting that. And someone who's computer literate. The reason why we thought of this is, and has access to a computer and internet. Because if you don't have access to a computer or the internet, you're not going to be able to talk to many plurals depending on where you live. So I think that's why they get represented more. Also, it's often dissociative identity disorder, people who have that diagnosis, or DDNOS, or, I mean, DDNOS isn't really official anymore, not really. There's a lot of them basically. So looking more at the dissociative like disorders that are in the DSM, so DID and others. Are there any identities that you all think are represented more often? So depending on where you live or what your experiences are, this might not be the same for you. I think for us, this is coming from like we said before, media and kind of like case studies we've seen, but also because we first started to learn about other plurals or multiples at the time back in the 90s and early 2000s. At that time, a lot of this was still true in the people that were being represented more often. So some of the things for you to think about is who is missing in the previous slide. A lot of people. And it's always important to ask who isn't being represented and why aren't they being represented. So first thinking about, okay, obviously people of color are missing in there. That's a really clear one. Anyone who's trans or non-binary, they're not there either. We were thinking about sexuality originally. I don't think we put it in the end, but often it tends to be with female assigned, someone who was assigned female at birth and also straight seems to be another one, which is also not, I don't think is actually common. And then why aren't these people being represented? So not only who's missing, but why are they being ignored? I mean, some of the easy things to think about with that would be like, well, racism, right? I mean, who are the people being studied in these research studies that are coming out? Who's looking for them? And the reason I say who's looking for them is because it's like, is it that people are trying to find who they are expecting? Are they going places where there's only a certain type of community? Another good one is English, like English speakers. It's mostly English speakers. So what about everybody else who doesn't speak English? So these are just some things to consider. Here are some examples. We already gave a few of people who are missing. So people of color, anyone assigned male at birth, and like we said, anyone who's trans or non-binary, children, so young kids, and adults in their 30s and up. It's like we apparently don't exist anymore. I don't know why. Immigrants, I was thinking more about us in the US, but also just any system not in the United States. Plural systems, and when we say that, we mean people who either don't have a diagnosis or they don't identify with their diagnosis, just all the other types of systems. Tulpas aren't represented as often, kin either, and a lot of other system types. So here are just a few groups that are not being represented, which they should be, because all of these people are plural as well. So again, why aren't these types of systems being represented? Let's say that you run some type of support group or a Discord chat or anything like that, any type of community, and you're seeing that some people are not there. You should ask yourself why, because is it that you're not reaching out to different places? That could be it. Or is it that your community, even if it's not doing it explicitly, is actually not inclusive for those people? Are certain people seeing your community and saying, that's not the place where I want to be. I'm not going to join this group. And you should really think about that and see why that's happening. And then if you can see what's happening there, how can you make a safer and more inclusive environment for other types of systems, other types of people? And also think about, if you're on the other end of this, let's say that you're not finding a community that you can fit in with well, what would you need to feel safe and included? I know that for us, one of the things is if we go to any type of support group and they're very explicit about excluding different types of systems, or they're outright just like bigoted or having like some sort of prejudice against a type of system, regardless of if we identify with that group or not, we will not join the group. So that's a clear thing of like, okay, if you are so openly hating another group, we don't want to have anything to do with you. Another really easy one for us would be if anyone's homophobic or transphobic, we're not joining either. Like, it's like, well, why would we want to be around that? So you need to think about both. So how can I make the environment more inclusive, and what would make you feel safer and more inclusive in any type of group? So I'm going to go to diagnosis. I don't know if there'll be a lot of comments or questions. I cannot see the chat right now, so I guess we'll find out. So a common argument that comes up a lot is, does someone have a diagnosis? What is it? Which one? How long? Who gave you the diagnosis? We're not saying that that's not important to some systems. It can be. I know that having a diagnosis can make somebody feel heard and validated. It can be a powerful experience in a positive way, because people can think, oh, we finally have a name for what we are, or like people are actually recognizing who we are. I get that. I think the problem that comes up is when this is used as a way to exclude people, or even to be like, I don't know, I've seen some weird stuff like, I'm like a better system, or we're a better system than you all because we've had our diagnosis for 3 years and you've only had it for 1, or something silly like that. Like, and it turns in, it can turn into a way to make people feel excluded, and to be hurtful to people. And this is definitely a problem. I think if you're seeing this coming up a lot, you should ask yourselves, like, okay, why? Hopefully you're not adding to this discussion. And again, look, there's nothing wrong with having a diagnosis or wanting one. I really can't understand the validity of having that. I think it's important. It's more when it turns into this kind of toxic environment where you're mistreating other people because they don't have a diagnosis. So here are some of the criteria for this dissociative disorders. We didn't put in all of it because honestly, it would take forever and it would be like, I don't know, 10 slides at minimum. So instead, we just put in a little bit of some of the things that you can think about if you're considering that you want to pursue a diagnosis. But I also want you all to think about who is not included in this group, because there's quite a few people who aren't. So one of the things that they talk about in the DSM is that it has to be some disruption in your normal integration of consciousness, and it explains what that means on the screen. So then what happens for people who are co-conscious? You don't really fit into this anymore, because part of it is that there should be a disruption. And this normally implies like losing time, not knowing the other people, and things like that. Also, it can potentially disrupt every area of psychological functioning. In fact, if being dissociative isn't distressing to you, then you actually don't meet criteria for this. It's often caused by traumatic experiences. So if you haven't had trauma, then this wouldn't fit you either. And so at the end, we just listed a few of the different dissociative disorders that are in the DSM. So DID, dissociative amnesia, depersonalization, derealization. Other specified is what people usually say as DD. Basically, what people still call DD, NOS, we still use it too, because it was used for a long, long time, is what now is other specified dissociative disorder and unspecified dissociative disorder. We can go into that more if somebody wants, but just know that those are the new-ish terms from 2013. Okay, I'm looking at a question right now. Because maybe culturally, the terms that are being used are not familiar to the types of minorities. What do you think? I'm assuming you mean what we were talking about earlier, like why they're not included or why they're not at the table. If it's that, I don't think that's the only reason. I do think that can be part of it, because if a system is thinking to themselves, well, we identify in a way that's more culturally appropriate, like I'm thinking in Puerto Rico. Like, it might be more common that someone would think, oh, I'm possessed by another entity. It's a possession. If that's the case and somebody feels that, and it could be true, then they may not identify with being a plural system. So, okay, that could be the case. We also think that there's other reasons why they're being excluded. I think that some communities really are not making an effort to include people that are different from them, in the same way that society in general has a lot of prejudice and bias and racism and all of that. Like, we're not excluded from that. So I just think that in the plural community, we're playing out the same problems we have in our society. So this is more of a call to be like, let's recognize that and at least try to join together as plural systems and try not to feed into the oppression that we're dealing with all the time already. I'm seeing another question. Wait, so then where will we fit in if we're diagnosed with PTSD, with DID, but we're a functional system plurals? That is a good question. So I'm assuming you're talking about what we just talked about, which is diagnosis. If it depends on what you mean by functional system. So, I mean, if it's not distressing you that you are a system, technically you don't have a diagnosis of DID. Depends on your therapist. I mean, it's just, if you're going by the DSM criteria and you are not distressed by being a system, then you can't have DID, because part of it is literally that you need to be distressed by it. And that means either that you all are not happy about it, or it means you're losing time. It means that it's affecting your work, your relationships. Like there has to be some negative effect. In the same way that that's true of every other diagnosis in the DSM, or most every diagnosis, where it has to cause some sort of problem in your life for it to be a diagnosis. If it's not a problem, then it's not a diagnosis anymore. I hope that makes sense to the person who's asking that. Yeah, so this is actually one of the problems why DID does not fit a lot of people. However, the way that some people get around it is that you could say DDNOS, but I mean, really, it's other specified dissociative disorder or unspecified dissociative disorder, because then that would be like, okay, you don't meet full criteria for DID, but you do have some things that you're struggling with. You are a system. If there's a reason that you need to have that in your chart, maybe you're working on that in your treatment plan. There has to be a reason why that's there, but that would be a way where you can encounter that. Let me know if either of you have any other questions. Okay. So I feel like we started to talk about this, but why might this be problematic, this issue of diagnoses? So it's not just the problems with the DSM that is not, well, it's not really a problem, but the fact that a lot of people who are plural may not fit into the DSM definition, or the fact that people are using diagnoses in not great ways. So even if somebody meets the criteria for any of these diagnoses, if they don't have access to mental health care, how are they going to get that? So then using that as a criteria to include or exclude people is a problem. And I think some of the most common ways I've seen that people don't have access is either that they can't afford it, because it's very expensive to get mental health care. Not just paying for the mental health, but finding time to actually go see a therapist. That's a lot. And when you're poor and struggling, you can't do that. I've also seen that happen a lot to people who are underage, because let's say that their parents don't want them to go to therapy. I mean, depends on the state, actually, the law. But overall, if your parents don't want you to go to therapy and you're not 18, you cannot go. So then how are you going to get access to that? And then the second one is kind of what I was already talking about before, is that some people don't meet the DSM-5 criteria, but they're still plural. And so how do you get around that? Also, what happens if you are seeing a therapist or a psychologist or any mental health provider, and they don't believe that any of this is true or any of this is real? Then what are you supposed to do? I just realized that it says DDNO. It's supposed to be DDNOS. Sorry about that, y'all. So basically, what we're trying to say is like, okay, so now you found a therapist. Hopefully you get along with them and it's going okay. But then you find out that they think that all dissociative disorders, or at least DID, don't exist. So how are you going to have a diagnosis then? Because that provider is telling you that they will never consider that for you because they don't think it's real. And I think that this is a big problem. We've seen this a lot. I mean, the amount of arguments we've gotten into with our colleagues, I can't even tell you how many we've had with people. I don't even know, because it comes up like, well, I don't really think that's a real thing. That was made up. Someone's going to give them PTSD. And it's like, well, what if they don't have trauma? It's like, well, that has association. Or it's like, or maybe it's BPD. That's actually what's happening. Or even worse, they're making it up. They're trying to manipulate me, and I'm not going to give them a diagnosis because that's what they want. These are all true stories. So, and I'm sure that some of you have had experiences like this as well. And so basically what we're trying to say is, here are all the problems with wanting someone to have a diagnosis. And again, it's not always a bad thing, but another thing that comes up a lot is that if somebody is saying, oh, you can only be in this space if you have a diagnosis, what happens if you really don't need mental health services at all? Plenty of people don't. So then why would you be going to a therapist to get a diagnosis of something that's not bothering you? I don't like that. I feel that it's kind of like, well, I'll get to that in a second, but basically one of the issues is that I feel that we're giving our power away to providers. And this is me speaking as a person and a psychologist at the same time, if that makes sense, where it's like, look, I like my job, okay? And I'm glad I had the training I did. I still don't think it's my place to decide, even as another system, who is a system and who's real and who's fake. That doesn't make any sense to me. Now, helping somebody figure out what's going on with them and their system, yeah, I think that's part of my job. But I don't like that there's this idea of, well, if you get a licensed therapist or psychologist to give you a diagnosis, then you're real. But if you don't, then you're fake. So some of the stuff that I was thinking of, I don't know why we put DDNO on this too. I'm really sorry that we have the typo twice. Anyway, so one of the issues that comes up too is gatekeeping. And this happens a lot with the trans community still. The fact that somebody who's trans has to go through a long process to basically get services. And I would say it's tough on both sides. There's a lot of times where I wish that clients didn't have to go through me to get services. There's some reasons why, and I understand that, but it's still difficult to be like, oh, I have to go to a therapist and kind of get approval before I can transition. And so you have to think that basically, I was trying to think of that like as a metaphor in the sense that it is not the same, but similar, because you're also going and being like, oh, I need this diagnosis in order to go on with my life, basically, and transition. Another thing that comes up a lot, so because we work with both communities a lot, basically sexual and gender minorities and plural groups, is that if somebody has a diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder or any other dissociative disorder, it might be harder to get transition services because there's a lot of stigma towards that. And if somebody thinks that you're a danger to yourself or others, depending on why, you might not be able to transition when you want to. And it's because if somebody, there are people who need to be more stable before they take some transitioning steps because of whatever is going on. But because there's so much stigma against dissociative disorders and a lot of fear, I mean, I always get really worried when working with a system who wants to transition, not because of their decision. I mean, that's a whole other thing we can talk about, but we get worried because we're unsure if other providers are going to take them seriously or not, or if they're going to have more pushback than if they were a singlet. So these are the things that come to mind. Hence, some people might not want a diagnosis, and there's plenty of other reasons why they might not want that. So here are some other ones, like maybe somebody doesn't want a diagnosis because they're worried about being targeted in general in the mental health system. I'm sure some of you know there are some diagnoses that have more stigma than others, and if they get marked in your chart, people tend to treat you differently, you know, especially if it's combined with something else. So like, I hear a lot from people with BPD that they say, oh, now that this is in my chart, I'm going in for issues with pain, and they don't believe me, you know, or I'm saying I'm struggling with X, and they're telling me that they don't think that's true. And people are like, I feel like it's because of this diagnosis that they're stigmatizing me. And then what about other countries outside the United States that have different ways in dealing with mental health? I mean, in some countries, you wouldn't go to a therapist. So it could be that you're going to more like a folk healer or to a temple or church. It depends. But you might be going to a different type of person who's going to do a healing that makes sense, with what you feel is the problem. And then in other cultures, so being a system can be for other reasons. So walk-ins, being a shaman, possession, etc. And then these are exclusions for the diagnosis in the DSM, because you have to make sure that it's not something that's happening because of, you have to make sure that the diagnosis isn't like saying that something in their culture is being seen as DID when it's not. That was a little bit confusing. So some of the stuff we were thinking about too was looking at why is there this big push on the value of having a diagnosis, and is it something that's meaningful for you or not? I mean, for some people it is, and for others it might not be as helpful. Think of other communities with a diagnosis in the DSM in the past or currently. So for example, I'm just trying to give you different examples of stuff in the DSM that hasn't been great. So one example is that homosexuality was a diagnosis in the DSM for a long time, and it was actually used to harm the community. Thankfully, it's not there anymore. And overall, psychology has gone a long way in accepting the LGBT community. Gender dysphoria is currently a diagnosis in the DSM, and it is a complicated conversation. But one of the reasons why it has stayed in the DSM, just as an FYI, is because the people who are, I don't know, people who are more like on the side of advocating for the community, which I would include us in that, is because that's how we can get people services. So unfortunately, the way the system works, you have to have a diagnosis to get services. And so we have to give you this diagnosis, which is a mental health thing, but not really. And it's actually just because we want to make sure that you get therapy covered because you need support, and also so that you can transition if you want. But there's still a stigma of, well, now do I have a mental health disorder? It's like, no, but it is a mental health diagnosis. So yeah. And then what would happen if in these communities you said, basically, this is one of the things we were thinking about when we were writing this, like if you were to go to anyone in the LGBTQ community and be like, oh, you don't have a diagnosis, so your experiences aren't real, or you're delusional, like how would that make them feel? Terrible. And hopefully you're not doing any of that. So it's thinking, okay, if that's true in those communities, why am I in our own community telling other plurals, if you don't have a diagnosis, your experiences aren't real, you're delusional, you're faking it, all of this stuff. Okay, I see a few questions. Do you have advice for systems on how to explore their local mental health providers about plurality? Sorry, we can't pronounce that right in English. The irony. In a way that would hopefully not jeopardize future care. I mean, This is another question I'm trying to make succinct. So how would you find a mental health provider and not jeopardize future care? We're assuming that you mean you want to ask about it, but you're worried that like if you tell them and they're not great, you won't be able to see them as a therapist anymore. It's kind of what we're thinking. Look, finding a therapist is really, really tough. I guess I say easiest, but it's not really easy. One of the things that you can do, let me put it that way, is that when you're looking up a therapist, you can already check what are their specialties. This doesn't mean always that it's true, just FYI. But in the US, at least, we have like the Psychology like Today website that most therapists are on. You can find people pretty easily on that. If not, you can search for them on their website. Because a lot of times if you're trying to go for insurance, for example, they don't have the best information. Sometimes it's just like their name and address and phone. It depends on the insurance. So we recommend going to like Psychology Today and trying to find them on there. And we'll get to why in a minute, or to their website. So in Psychology Today, they do have a thing for dissociative disorders that you can check. You can also see if it's somebody who works with trauma. If you need help with that, you might not, or anything else. They also have ways for you to mark if you work with the LGBTQ community. So that's one way to go about it. However, we have found that a lot of people, a decent amount of people, let's say, who put that on their Psychology like Today profile, it doesn't seem to really be their specialty. So often what we have done for ourselves in the past, and also we tell clients if we can't take someone, for example, is to look at their website instead. And this is also for the queer community, the entire community, like the LGBTQ community. It's like if somebody says that they work with the LGBTQ community, you should check their website too and make sure that's true. Same for plural. So when you go to their website, if they have something that literally mentions, I work with this community, or anything in their CV or anything on the website that is like, oh, okay, they really do, hopefully you'll be fine. If you don't see anything, I would be a lot more cautious, because what I've seen sometimes is like, oh, I work with this population, but then when you go, everything is about like ADHD, which is okay, but it's like, okay, but then that's your specialty, right? Not this. And there's no mention of anything else. So I would be really careful if you can't find any mention of it. When we were looking for a therapist for a long time, because we had really bad experiences until the current one, but the current one we've had for a long time. One of the things we did is we did a lot of cold calling, which, I mean, not great, but especially being in the field ourselves, it felt safer for us to do that, where we literally call up and just point blank ask. And then depending on their response to us would be if we'd even set up an intake, like a first session with them or not. Because some people already in the field, some people on the phone would pretty clearly be like, okay, I don't want to work with this person, just based on their responses. We still had a few people who seemed okay, met them in person, was not okay. And I'll be honest, so even with the one that we ended up with, we did not come out to them for, I forget how long, a few months at least, I think a little under 6 months, because we didn't feel safe to do so. And then until we kind of felt like, okay, this person's probably not terrible, then we came out and it went well. But I mean, this is after searching for a long time. Hopefully that answers your question. I wish I had a better answer for you. Oh, and actually the ISSTD does have a find a therapist function on their website. We are on that because it's a big community. However, it might not be the best fit for you. I would say to learn more about the ISSTD and see if you feel like someone on that list would be able to help you or not. You can always go check. I mean, if you look at our website, it definitely says plural positive. It does not say DID. I don't think it does. So, all right. The other question, I think from the same person, or finding someone in your community to help advocate for yourself in the medical field. So I think maybe you mean like having a friend help advocate for you. I don't know if that's kind of what you're referring to. If that's the case, if you're open to friends or family, if you have people in your life who can help you, it is useful to have someone kind of come with you to help advocate for issues in the medical field. I mean, so ironically, even though we're putting this online live, we're not open to a lot of people in our life. I guess they'll find out soon. So that tells you something. So one of the ways that we've done this, we are out to a few people who live close to us, and sometimes we've asked them to come help us, or even one time we were having a really bad experience, and one of our friends who's known us for a long time still lived in the area, and they were able to literally come and sit in on something that we were worried about and help us advocate for ourselves. That's been helpful. We're in a much better space now, though, so interestingly enough, we help each other more often than not. So the way that we go about it is like, let's say one of us has is more assertive that day or has more energy. Then we're like, okay, are you able to go to this session or this doctor's appointment or deal with this? Yes, I will do that. So we actually split up the work in a way, if we need to help support each other. All right, let me answer the question. So how do you deal with community members who are openly anti-androgenic? I mean, it's pretty much kind of what we're trying to talk about with this whole thing about diagnosis. There's are times that we really try to go in and if we have the energy for it, communicate with them, give them actual research and data and information. I mean, there's a lot of research for DID. There's a lot less about being plural, so that's harder. But even saying, have you considered this perspective? Or I don't know, it's hard. I think the same as it was any other issue. If somebody is so against the community, it is difficult to get them to change. If someone's more in the gray area, it is easier. Actually, one time, one of my students told me something that kind of stuck with me, that she gets it. I don't know if she still does this, or she sees this, you should let me know. But I know that when I was working with her, I guess it was last year, she was saying that she was getting into a lot of Facebook arguments about politics all the time. And I was like, is that helpful though? Because I mean, you seem so stressed out about this. And I go into them sometimes, but sometimes I don't find them to be that useful. And she said, you know what? I'm not doing it for the person I'm talking to. I'm doing it for the people who are reading our conversation and who haven't decided. And I was like, that's a really good perspective to take. And I think especially since then, we have seen it more in that way of just trying really hard to be respectful, regardless of how people treat us. I mean, we'll block someone if they're really that terrible, but it's more trying to show, I'm not going to fall into the same space that you are, and I'm going to give a different perspective and different information, not in hopes of changing you, because a lot of times I don't think the person who's that adamant about it is going to change, but in hopes of changing the people who might be reading this thread, and who might actually be in more of a middle area. So that's how we deal with that. All right, we're going to go back to this, but please let us know if you have any other questions, because I know we still have some time. Okay, what else were we saying? All right, so how can I be a good ally? And actually, I think that after this, we'll probably have time for just questions, I'm pretty sure. So how can I be a good ally? So first of all, you should evaluate all of you all, so this is for systems specifically in this case, but values and identities like stated before. We really do believe that the more you know about yourself or yourselves, the better you will be in being an ally, because it's just going to be, you're going to have more insight. Even if you are triggered or angry or something comes up for you, you'll probably know why, instead of reacting and being like, oh, I'm mad because this person sucks. Sometimes, yeah, that's true. But other times it could be something that's going on within you all that you really need to recognize. Gain insight and acceptance in the areas that you have more privilege. I think that's helpful. One, because you can recognize like, oh, I'm coming from a different place of privilege or marginalization than this person is. But also looking at like, okay, I can understand where this person's coming from. They have a different experience. Think of what types of systems and individuals you have a strong negative response to. It is okay, as long as you're not hurting anyone. And I also am including like hurtful chat or bullying. It's just important to recognize it. So what that means is, instead of, so there's two ways that people usually deal with this. One would be like, oh, I'm having a negative reaction to you, I'm just gonna like rage at you. That would be one reaction. Another one would be, I feel so terrible that I'm having a bad reaction. And this doesn't have to be conscious, but you know, I feel so bad that I'm having a bad reaction to this person, or that I'm angry, that I'm going to suppress it because I don't want to feel angry to anybody. That's actually not helpful either. What is better is to look at, okay, where is this coming from and why are you having this response? Look, we are definitely not perfect. And there are times, especially when we were much younger, that we did not understand certain types of systems and didn't really understand like the differences. And for us, what was helpful was to be like, okay, we should talk to more people who are like this, who are different, and just get to know them. That was really useful. And thankfully, those people were able to have the energy to even be able to talk to us, you know, because there's no responsibility as a marginalized group to educate anyone. And at the time, we were pretty active on LiveJournal. And so we had quite a few people who ended up being our friends for a while, who just had different system experiences, and that really helped. Another thing that was useful was to read more. So we used to read a lot more books, but there's some things that you don't find. We still read a lot of books, but I mean about plural topics. There's some types of systems you don't see in books very often, is what we're trying to say. So like tulpas, for example, it's harder. So instead, it's like, okay, is there a website that seems like a reputable website that I can go to and learn more about this community? So that's a way that you can understand that these different systems, you can see them more as like people instead of this entity or group that you dislike so strongly. So those are some ways that you can handle that. But I really do think going back, like, where is this coming from? Why are you having the response is really helpful. Okay, so the question I'm seeing is, singular person ally here, how can I help the community? So when you're in a more privileged group, so in this space, it would be that you're singular in a plural group. The best thing to do is to use that power in a way that helps the system or helps the marginalized group by talking to other people in your group. That's probably a really weird way of saying it. But basically it would be, okay, I'm a singlet. I'm understanding more about people who are plural. I'm going to educate other singlets about this. It doesn't mean appropriating stories or anything like that, but it does mean saying, let's say you hear someone, I don't know, what's a common thing? Because Split came out not that long ago. Oh, did you see Split? I think it's so realistic. And I'm sure that everyone in the community or everyone is like this. And you can say, you know, that's actually not true. People aren't like that. You see what I mean? So it's like using the privilege you have to step in when you hear people making a microaggression or a macroaggression about somebody, which we're going to talk about more. And I realized that we forgot to add more in here. But basically, when a micro or macroaggression is, so microaggression is when somebody says something harmful that's also a little weird. Like, you're like, I don't like that, but I'm not sure why. It's the easiest way to describe it. Macroaggression is just like plain out racism would be an example. So if you're a singlet, you can definitely step in and try to get people to understand that's not true. Or if someone says like, oh, you're acting like you have a split personality. That's another common antiquated term. You can say, hey, hold on, like that's not, you shouldn't be saying that. That's not a way to say that. There's people who actually are plural. So any way that you can step in like that, it's basically how can you educate your own group in a way, because they might listen to you more because you're in that group, basically. So as a singlet, if another singlet is talking to you, they might be like, oh, if you're saying that, maybe I should hear what you're saying. If somebody is plural and they've already deemed that everyone who's plural is, I don't know, crazy or something, they're not going to listen to us. So that's an easy way. I mean, thankfully there's this conference, right? So you can really like send links to all your friends if you want to do that. I just think that those are the easy ways for you to be able to step in more, because really there are a lot of comments that are made about people in our community all the time. And whenever these movies come out, it's worse. Now that there's a new one, I forget. Anyway, point is, people are going to be terrible when the new one comes out, or if it just did. I've been trying to ignore it. Okay, so going back to this, hold on. Okay, so some other things you can do to be a good ally would be processing anything you need to be able to engage with others. What that means is, maybe you had a bad experience with a type of system with a different group than you all are in, and you have to kind of like deal with that traumatic experience or difficult experience to be able to talk to other people who are similar, because maybe until you get past that, you can't, like it's so stressful for you all that you just can't do it. Also, we want to make it clear, this isn't talking about people who are toxic or abusive that you need to get away with, okay? So all the things we're talking about being a good ally, if somebody is treating you badly, abusing you, anything like that, you don't have to engage in like with them. You can block them, you can go away from them. You don't have to spend your energy on someone who's going to mistreat you. So you always take care of yourselves first. This is more like if you're having an issue with someone who's actually respectful, or someone who you want to maintain a relationship who is not abusive, this is what we're talking about. So this is more, I'm trying to think of a better way to explain this. So instead of people who have hurt you because they're being abusive, this is more people who have hurt you by saying a microaggression, or people who are like, oh, we have a different value and you had some sort of disagreement. You can also work together as a system to see why it's affecting everyone, if it's affecting everyone, and how to work on it together. We say that because sometimes it could be an experience that a lot of people in the system had, or a bias that a lot of people in the system had. I mean, because, we do live together, we share some things. And if that's the case, you should talk about it. If it's a bias that someone specifically has, then you can look at it a little bit differently. So another way that you can think of how to help the community and be a good ally would be, okay, how are we going to include these marginalized systems and individuals? Here's an example that we thought of because we see this all the time. So basically not having a profile that says all of this, so like no endos, no fiction, blah, 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 blah. And instead saying all systems are welcome here. Like that in itself is very different. So thinking of the language that you're using, how if you're running a support system and you're excluding other people, what does that actually mean? So those are some ways you can be a good ally. So another thing to do is always remember to bring other people into the conversation. Like we said before, who's being unheard or unseen in the community and why. Like that's important. This is more like, again, for people who maybe are running a community, but even for someone who's a member of a community, if you see that people are being excluded, you should say something. we can give an example. So we're a part of a local psych organization, like an organization for psychologists. And we've noticed that there are very few POCs in this group for a long time. So one of the things that we've been trying to do is say, you know, we need to have more POCs join the group, or it'd be nice to have them join the group. Why are they not joining? You know, and talking to the few POCs who are there, we've had our experiences of racism and bias from the group, so we understand, at least in part, what's going on, and being like, okay, how can this group be more inclusive? And part of it has been, well, not only like, part of it has been having POCs in positions of power, so other people can see, oh, wait a second, if that person's in a position of power, maybe this group respects my identity, and maybe this person will back me up. And then also changing some of the language on demographics, which has been an issue as well. This is an example of something you can do if you're in that type of group. And this was when we were just a community member. Now we do have a higher position, but we started this beforehand. So as a community member, you can also bring up to the people running it, hey, I've noticed these people are not here. Like, why? We should be working on having them be here as well. Let's see what else. So this, I mean, pretty much the same thing. Like, why are they not there? And then making an effort to include them into this group. And then using your areas of privilege to stand up for others. Funny enough, that is kind of what I was talking about with the singlet who asked the question earlier. Defending systems and encouraging respectful dialogue. So this is also like, you know, maybe a friend of yours is saying something. You can always say, hey, hold on a second. Like, it's not okay to discriminate towards an entire group of people, you know? So stepping in that way. Do not engage in this yourself. So in othering systems, being like, well, I don't want to engage with so-and-so. Again, it doesn't mean you have to engage with everybody, but you know, there's certain ways that are more toxic than others when you're like, well, I don't talk to anybody who's whatever. Like that's a problem. Not judging any other system's reality, because you can't, like, how would you feel if somebody called you out as fake? Not great. So then don't do that to other people. And then this is one of the things that comes up a lot, like we were just saying, really no one has the power to decide if a system is real or fake. No one at all, except for the system themselves, okay? And then it's like remembering that, and what is the purpose? Like, if you find yourself engaging in this, really thinking, why am I or we doing this? What benefit does it give you? Because I think that really says more about the person who's doing it or the people who are doing it than the one who's being targeted. You know, is it that you might feel like, oh, if I set the standard, then I'm valid. Like if I tell them that they're not, it really doesn't mean that at all. So having an honest look at yourself at why it is that you're engaging in this. And then kind of, we mentioned this a little bit earlier too for our own journey, but making an effort to educate yourselves. Like if there's a group you don't know much about and you're having a strong reaction to, I mean, if you have access to the internet, thankfully there's a lot of information out there. It's always best to get information from the groups directly. So if you can find any type of group or website that's actually made by people in that community, that's what you should be looking for. And then, so with marginalized communities, any marginalized communities, they're often asked to do emotional labor for people who have more privilege. Do not do that. So there is a big difference between maybe I'm going to ask someone to point me in the right direction. That might be okay if they're comfortable. And I'm going to educate myself. So I'm coming into the conversation more knowledgeable. That's different than being like, hey, I don't know anything about your group and I kind of hate you. Could you tell me about yourself? Like don't do that. And this happens to a lot of marginalized groups. It really does, where it's like, I need you to teach me about yourself. Happens in therapy all the time too. Hopefully not to you all, but I just thought of this as we were talking, that I still remember once we were seeing a psychiatrist, and they just really could not understand that we weren't a white straight woman born in the United States, basically her identities. And it was so difficult and frustrating. And at best, which is sad, she would ask us to educate her about our community, but would make no effort to educate herself at all. I remember at one point, one of us told her, like, you could at least look up like what it even means to be Puerto Rican, or what it even means to be queer, or anything. And her response, I've never forgotten it, was, well, I don't do that for my other patients, so why would I do that for you? It's like, okay, we don't see that person anymore. So point is, a lot of people do that. And sometimes it can be a friend even, who they might mean well, but look, you need to do your own research. You can't ask everyone to teach you. Now, if they're willing to teach you, that is okay. And even stuff like this, like if you think about all the people who are presenting in this community, most of who are plural themselves, right? That's a way that you can get information from someone in the community with like who's offering this information to you. And also considering that, of course, all of the stuff that we're all saying is like each presenter's experience, right? So it doesn't speak for the entire community, but you're at least getting information from someone in the community. What else have we missed? Well, we're just giving some examples of topics that you might want to look into if you don't know about them. It's like different types of systems, different cultures, etc. I'm trying to see what time. Still have about, what, 10 minutes it looks like? So what are some things you can do for self-care? This is honestly more for the plural folk, just FYI. Everyone else can still listen. I'm just letting you know the perspective that we had mostly going into this, but I think it's useful for anybody. So for anyone, it's hard to engage in these dialogues day in and day out. Like, we take breaks too. So just know yourselves well enough that if you're out of spoons, look, you're out, take a break, okay? And people have more minority statuses and more minority stress. They don't have as much space for this. Also remind yourself that you don't always need to engage with someone. There's so many times that we're having a dialogue, well, not really a dialogue, an argument with someone. And it's like, you know what? I don't want to keep talking to this person. It's not going anywhere. We're just getting stressed out. And I just stop. I don't have to continue the conversation. What does it matter? It's my decision, because to have a dialogue, there has to be two people, and I can just stop responding. You can also block someone if they're being terrible to you, or if you just don't want to talk to them. Like, it doesn't have to get to abuse or someone being toxic for you to block someone. It is okay to block someone who you're just like, I just don't want to deal with this person. That is fine, because you have the choice to decide who you're going to engage with and who you're not going to engage with. Just make sure that you're doing this from a place of self-care and not like revenge. I guess it could be both, but it's just more important to be like, okay, we do not want to engage with this person. We don't have the space for it. It's harmful for us. It's okay to take a step back. That's different than like, oh, you did something to hurt me. Well, watch, I'm going to block you. And I know that's going to hurt you. Like, stuff like that is not really that helpful either. Other stuff to do, check in with your system and with yourselves. Like, what are some things that help? Because it could also be, let's say that one of us is okay having a dialogue, and maybe whoever it is doesn't realize that somebody else is getting triggered by it. It's like, okay, then we should really stop that conversation, because even though one person might be okay, someone else is hearing it, and it's a bit much for them. Do you want to engage in this dialogue or not? Are there communities where you feel accepted and safe? And if not, hopefully you can find some. I think that makes a big difference as well. And also important to do fun things. Hooray, we wanted to end on something less stressful. So what are some things that you like doing? Video games, which are great. Again, Pokemon, important. So there is a new game coming out soon. That's an important thing to note. So sorry, we like video games a lot. But if you like video games, or even if you don't, that's okay. Finding something that you like doing. So here are some things that we thought about. Of course, video games at the top, reading, which is also great, exercise, spending time with loved ones. I feel like I should have put pets separately, because I don't know, I feel like it's a little different. Going outside for a walk, focusing on your mental health, and anything else. I mean, really, it could be something as simple as like, I'm going to take 5 minutes and drink this tea and just kind of like take a break, or I'm going to watch, I don't know, cute kitten videos on YouTube. I feel like that would be nice. Anything, it doesn't matter. So trying to look into things that would be good self-care that you can manage, and that help you all. So that's the last slide that we had. Looks like we have 6 minutes. I don't know if we just added that correctly. So if anyone has any questions, now would be the time. We know there's a delay, so hopefully we'll get some. And until then, just know that we're literally just staring at our cat, waiting for your questions to come in. One of them anyway. Okay, I'm going to answer the question that I can see, but any other questions you can send because we checked our phone. What Pokemon are on your team right now? See, that is an important question that some of you might not have thought of. I'm just kidding. Which team? That is an important question as well. On Pokemon Go, we just use any Pokemon that are cute and powerful. That's very biased, I guess. We also have a team of Alolan like executors because they look so ridiculous that we like having a team of them in Pokemon Go to go to raids to. It's very silly. But yes, those are some of the Pokemon that we have. Oh, actually, another question just came in, but it disappeared. If you can resend it, we'll click on the notification before it goes. Okay. Okay, when looking at a good therapist to treat my DID, what are some good questions to ask them? How can I pick someone who can help? I think it depends on what type of help you all are looking for. I'm going to use myself an example because it's just easier and hopefully that helps answer the question. I know that when we were looking, first we were trying to find somebody who would at least believe that having DID or being plural was real. That was like number one. And then after that was somebody who would be plural positive. So, I guess we've had a lot of different experiences. So some of the things that we would ask would be, okay, have you ever worked with someone who's had trauma? Because for us, that is also important. And if they said no, then we're not going to see them. If they said yes, then it'd be like, okay, what like, can you tell us like what type of traumas? Not specifics of another client, more like there's specific stuff that we needed help with. So we wanted to make sure that these people that we were talking to had experience with the type of trauma that we had experienced. And then when it came to being plural, we do usually start with DID because people understand that better. So they're like, oh, have you ever worked with anyone who has DID? If they said no, it doesn't necessarily mean that we wouldn't talk to them. It was more how they said it. Like if they said no, but I'd be willing to consult, or I'd be willing to, I don't know, like the response was like not negative. Like if it was someone who's just more open, even if they hadn't worked with that community before, that was okay. For the people who had experience and were considered to be experts in the field, we wanted somebody who was plural positive. Honestly, we never found anybody at the time. So the questions that we asked were, okay, what is your end goal for therapy with somebody who has DID? And if they said integration, we would not talk to them because we have no interest in that at all. We're definitely a plural positive system. We intend on staying plural forever. That's not something we want. And unfortunately, most of them said that. We would try to ask questions like, do you have any experience with plural positivity? No. In fact, the therapist that we got in the end, who was helpful, didn't have that much experience. But the reason we picked them is because they were very open about being in a lot of really small, marginalized, and kind of like niche communities that have a lot of stigma as well. And that's who they worked with. And funny enough, that's I think one of the reasons it worked, because we're in some of those communities too, but it was more like, okay, if you're open about this and those are the groups you work with and you work with trauma, maybe. And we still tested them for like months. So, okay, let me see. Is there any way we could, as a community, set up in-person support groups around the world that include everyone under the plural umbrella? I mean, yes, you could. It says drop your presentation. Let me see. I mean, yeah, you could give, let me think. I'm trying to think of how to answer the question well. I think that you could set up a lot of in-person support groups. I think that you can share stuff even from this conference. I mean, because we have the internet and not everyone has access, but a lot of people do, I don't think it's hard to have a lot of support groups. I mean, there's so many different types of social media or listservs or like video conference. I mean, there's so many ways to do that. So it'd be more to figure out, can you get different types of systems and different type of people to be leaders? That I think would be the most important, because if you have people in that community who are some of the leaders of your support group or system or network, first of all, other people will feel more comfortable going there, but also you'll have people in-house who can tell you when you've done something wrong, right? Because they can say, oh, you know what, this doesn't really work for this type of system, or like, oh, this wouldn't work for this culture, or probably wouldn't. But when you don't have those people in this dialogue, that's when it's a problem. So basically trying to make a very diverse group of people to be able to set that up. Also, I mean, it can't all be in English, right? So if you really want to set up something around the world, you have to have people who speak different languages, because look, even for us who speak English, we would rather be in a support group where people speak Spanish, because it's so much easier and we can express ourselves much more easily than we can in English. So I think that's something to consider. How do you cope with people who say hateful things and absolutely refuse to have civil discussion regarding being plural? Like, how do you keep your morale up? A very good question. I think the stuff we were talking about was about self-care, like taking care of yourself, taking breaks. Look, we've gotten hurt many times by this stuff as well. I mean, really. Even on our Tumblr, we've taken a break from it, because I feel like the last 3 times we've tried to be more engaged in Tumblr, we've just seen people be terrible either to us or to each other. I think we mentioned this in, I forget which one of the other panels, but we definitely took a break. And funny enough, because of that, we went to Instagram instead. Not that there aren't issues on Instagram, but we just have different people we follow. And it was just a really nice break. In fact, we mostly follow plural positive people on Instagram, if at all. So that was nice. It is really hard to keep your morale up. I feel like this conference helped us a lot, because right around the time that we found out about this, we had just had like that third or whatever interaction on Tumblr of people being terrible about being plural. And we had also had a lot of other psychologists just be really crappy, there's another way for it, about people being plural or each other. Because most people don't know about it. I mean, I guess they will now, but so we were being told this not only online when we engaged with the community, but also by our colleagues and students who have no idea that we're in the community ourselves. And it is difficult. Self-care helps. Doing something to help the community for us is really helpful. So we can find a way to give back. Hence what I was trying to say, that interestingly enough, I feel like the conference itself helped us a lot, because it was like, okay, one, because it happened around the same time that we saw the notice. It was like, okay, one, this is something that's happening. That means there are other people who are plural, and it looks like they're actually doing something about being plural positive. That is amazing. And then also it's like, and we're going to talk to them and present. Fuck it. Like, we have to do this. So for us, that's what was really useful to do, to be like, there's a group of people who have similar values. I'm feeling a little bit less demoralized, and also we can give back in a way to the community. Besides that, I really go back to taking a break and self-care. I think that's really important. And any way that you all can support each other in your system, because there's sorry, I just got another notice up. Anyway, any way that you can support the system with each other is helpful. I mean, there's so many times where there's stuff that maybe we can't talk about as openly with some of our singlet friends, especially the ones that we're not out to. And us supporting each other internally is really helpful. Like, we'll literally do something like, okay, let's just watch a movie that we can all kind of agree on and just eat I don't know, crappy food, delicious food though, boba, stuff like that, and just hang out. And that's really nice to take that break. So hopefully that helps you. The reason we laughed is because of Emmy saying that we should follow them on Instagram. We will let you know. We might already be following you all, actually. I don't know. We might be. All right. I don't know if there's any other questions. I know that we're a little bit over, so Chris's can let us know what to do. If there is any last minute question, we'll answer it, and if not, we'll probably wrap up. But anyone who wants to like reach out and go get more information, maybe we can put our email in the description later or something like that.
Yeah. Thank you very much for presenting with us.
No problem. Very happy to do it.
This is great. Thank you, everybody. The chat will end probably about a minute or two after we end the video. So I'm trying to make sure everybody caught up.
Okay, no problem. I will just show my Pokemon, which is obviously important, while we're waiting. Aren't they cute?
They're so adorable.
I would show one of my cats, but they're both asleep. So.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone, for attending.
Have a great night, and we'll see you all. It's 8:30 a.m. tomorrow for another plenary session. So there's only one video at 8:30, and that's Achieving Healthy Multiplicity, the case for 5 steps. It's basically the Chris's arguing with the ISSTD.
That sounds great.
Okay. So we'll see you guys in 13 and a half hours or so.
Mm-hmm.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.